Hi guys, today we're going to be talking about value scales. So for Wednesday, because we're not meeting on Memorial Day, I'm going to have you guys creating a value scale chart that's going to be consisting of 10 individual boxes for each of the 4 applications of value. So for these 4 applications of value, we have hatching, cross-hatching, stippling, and random mark application. Now when we look at hatching, what we see is basically a concentration of consistently vertically applied lines. And we can see that the range of all of these charts here goes from black all the way to white. And these are continuous gradations, so we could have, maybe even 100 individual values within each of these charts. But what I want you guys to do is I want you to create a chart that looks like this. And each of those charts has 10 individual 1-inch by 1-inch boxes. So I'm going to be showing you how to set up this chart in just a moment. And then we're going to be using this chart in preparation for an upcoming project that we'll be talking about later. Okay, so we talked about hatching. With cross-hatching, it's very similar to the hatching application. The primary difference being that we're also including lines going horizontally as well as vertically. So that's the main difference. So if we look very closely at this chart, we can see that our values are obtained by creating lines that intersect that are both vertical and horizontal as opposed to just in one direction. Okay, our stippling, that's going to be a network of dots. So if we're going from the black side of the chart all the way over to the white side, we notice that it basically consists of tiny little dots, and when we get to the darkest side, the dots are very, very concentrated, almost to the point where it just feels like a solid black. And then all the values in between, we can see that the density of the amount of dotted marks lightens up almost to the point where there's virtually none on the white end of the spectrum. Now with random mark, this one is a little bit different than the previous 3 in that instead of going in a particular direction or using, tiny dots to achieve your values, what you're going to be doing here is you're going to be kind of drawing in a random application, meaning that your hand's going to be moving around. So if I start with the lighter values, I'm using very little pressure, and then as I work over to my dark range, I'm starting to increase my pressure, and you can see the lines kind of go in any which direction they like, but consistently so. Okay. So 4 applications of value. So again, just to make note that these charts are continuous. Again, we could break this into, maybe 100 or 200 different individual values. But I want you guys to be able to show a distinction between each value for each of those 4 applications, okay? So I'm going to read the handout. It says measure 4 1-inch by 10-inch rectangles on a sheet of cardstock. You want to make sure you're using cardstock for this one because it is heavier, and we just want to get into the practice of using that and not computer paper. You're going to be dividing each rectangle into 10 1-inch by 1-inch boxes, starting with your darkest black value box furthest to the left and your lightest, the white value box furthest to the right, and create 4 value scales demonstrating the techniques illustrated above. So it also specifies to use pencils for hatching and cross-hatching, and pen and ink for stippling and random mark. So I want you guys to be using your fine design liners for stippling and random mark for this assignment, just for demonstration. I just have my 2B pencil here, but you want to try either your microns or your Sharpie fine design liners to achieve the results for the stippling and random mark. For the hatching and cross-hatching, I would say for the darker value boxes, you're going to want to use like a 4B or a 2B, something that's on the softer end so that you can really go dark. And then I'd switch over about halfway through maybe the 4th or 5th box to an HB or a 2H pencil. That way you're working with something that's a little bit harder graphite, and it's going to be easier for you to have control over how light you want to make your lines. Okay, so again, 10 distinct boxes, and we'll see each of these individual boxes here measures 1 inch in height and 1 inch in length. Okay, and another thing we're going to notice is with this chart, and I want you guys to set your charts up in a very similar manner here, we have different measurements here. So on the top margin and the bottom margin of the paper, we've measured 3/4 of an inch and 3/4 of an inch. Okay, and the reason why we do that is because the paper's height, if we're going landscape oriented, which is horizontal, is 8.5. So each of these 4 individual boxes measures 1 inch in height, with 3 1-inch spaces in between each of those 4 value application boxes. So that's a total of 7 inches, leaving us with an additional 3/4 of an inch on the bottom and 3/4 of an inch on the top. And then because this is 10 boxes going across horizontally for each of the 4 value applications, that's going to leave us with an extra 1/2 inch on the left and the right side margins. Okay, so we want to be able to trim this down with our measuring tool in order to make the measurements as precise as we can make them. So I'm going to show you how to set this chart up, and then you're going to be exploring each of those 4 applications of value from black to white and having a distinct transition between each one, meaning that each box is distinctly lighter or distinctly darker than the box immediately to the left and to the right of it. Okay, and as you can see, I don't think I mentioned that before, but we have the labeling of each of the 4 value applications. So again, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 boxes for the 4 applications, and then a 1-inch space in between for a total of 7, and then 3/4 of an inch on the top, 3/4 of an inch on the bottom, 1/2 an inch on the right, and 1/2 an inch on the left. So what we want to do first is make sure that we've measured a smaller rectangle within this 8.5 by 11 inch sheet of paper, so that we can cut these down into even, consistent, and manageable individual boxes. Okay, so make sure you have your cardstock on hand, make sure you have 2 to 3 different pencils, and a couple different fine design liners such as your Micron or your Sharpie, and a ruler. A simple ruler on hand would be fine. If you only have your yardstick, you can work with that as well. Something smaller for this assignment is going to be a little bit more efficient. So we want to start by measuring that 3/4 of an inch. Okay, so we're going to be trimming that 3/4 of an inch off of the top and the bottom to narrow that rectangle down to 7 inches from the total 8.5 by 11. So make sure that you have your ruler on the inches side and not the centimeter side, or it's going to get messed up. So make sure that you're following that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just make a few small marks for my 3/4 of an inch on the top and the bottom on both sides, and then we're going to connect those dots and then trim off the 1/2 inch after that. Okay, so I'm just measuring 3/4 of an inch on each side. Move these lines real quick here. Give me just a moment. Alright, 3/4 of an inch. I'm going to connect those lines to trim it down to that 7 total inches for the height. Okay. Just missed a measurement here. Give me one moment. There we go. All right. Just double check one more thing here. Yep, that's right. It's always good to double check your measurements, just in case, to make sure everything is nice and consistent. Okay, let me show you what this looks like here. Just going to clean it up a little bit, get rid of any smudges. So far, this is what we have. I know it's a little difficult to see. Let me see if I can adjust it there. Alright, so we can see I've trimmed 3/4 of an inch off the top and 3/4 of an inch off the bottom. So the next thing we're going to have to do is we're going to trim 1/2 inch off the left and 1/2 inch off the right. Again, we're dealing with 11 total inches horizontally, and we want to just have 10, so we can subdivide that 10 into 10 individual 1 inch by 1 inch boxes. So I know this is a lot of measuring, but this will set you up nice so that you can put your distinct value scales into your chart. Okay. Alright, so now I'm going to be measuring that 1/2 inch on each of the sides. Okay. Okay, and I've just drawn some connecting lines that are intersecting with the previous 2 lines that I created. Okay, so there we have it. We've trimmed 3/4 of an inch off the top and the bottom, and 1/2 inch off the left and the right hand side. So now we're ready to do our measuring of the boxes themselves. So again, each of those boxes is 1 inch in height, and that means there's going to be 1 inch gap in between each of those 4 techniques: the hatching, cross hatching, stippling, and random mark. Okay. Alright, so, and if you want to check to make sure, take your ruler and just measure the height on each side to make sure that you actually have measured 7 inches. Again, it's always better to just double check the height so that you can avoid any inconsistencies. Okay, and I know some of this is kind of washed out, but this is the best we can do right now. Okay, all right. So I measured, everything looks consistent on both sides, and now I'm going to be measuring along the inch mark from 0 to 7. So with every inch on the left and the right hand side, I'm going to be making small tick marks at the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4, the 5, the 6, and actually I don't need to do the 7th. The 7th is the entire length, or I mean the entire height, excuse me. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. All right. So if we look very closely here, we can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So 4 of these are going to be the 4 applications of value, and the other 3 are going to be the breaks that are in between. Okay. So now you can go ahead and connect the left and the right hand side with line, and then you can subdivide those into the sets of 10 that you're going to need for this assignment. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just connect those lines real quick, and I'll show you what my chart looks like before we get to the final step of this. Okay. All right, so that step's done. So now what we have is, like I said, the penultimate stage right before you measure the 1 inch by 1 inch boxes. So at this point you're ready. You can go ahead and label each of those 4 bars in their entirety, and then you can go ahead and measure out 1 inch increments across. And I'll show you a way to do that in a minute. That's easy, but I'm going to first go ahead and label each one. So the first one's going to be hatching, and I can write hatching in that top 3/4 of an inch margin. Cross hatching, that's going to be below that. Yep, cross hatching. Stippling. And random mark. And this just helps so that you can keep track of where your boxes are versus where the breaks are before you make your 10 individual measurements. Okay, so now I have my labels, as you can see. And now we're going to go ahead and measure across the entire length of each of the 4 boxes and make individual 1 inch by 1 inch boxes. So I would do the top where it says hatching, measure individual 1 inch marks, and then do the same thing at the very bottom underneath the random mark one right before the bottom margin page break. And then you'll just connect them vertically like we did horizontally just a moment ago. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick, and then I'll show you what we got, and then you guys should be good to go to try this on your own. Okay. So I'm going to measure at the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And again, we don't have the last 10th measurement because that's the right-hand edge of your boxes. Okay. Now I'm flipping over my paper, and I'm going to make those 9 marks and then connect them. At the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Alright, so I made those 9 marks on the top and the bottom, and now I'm going to connect them. Okay, so you want to make sure that you're not drawing through each of those horizontal breaks, those 3 1 inch tall breaks in between your sets of boxes, just to give it a cleaner aesthetic as opposed to just having lines intersecting everywhere. It's okay for what we have for the outer measurements, I'm not worried about it, but you want to make sure that you avoid measuring or having lines in those breaks. Okay, so I'm going to just very quickly go ahead and connect those with a vertical line. So I don't need to measure each of the individual bars from the top and the bottom, just the very top of the page and the bottom of the page, and then just making sure to avoid each of those breaks. That way you don't have to worry about individual little measurements and everything stays nice and consistent. Okay, so you'll be making 4 vertical lines for each of your sets of marks. Okay. And this should result in 4 value scales with 10 individual 1 inch by 1 inch boxes each. Okay. Just about finished here. All right, last set. Okay, there we go. So we have a chart that looks just like the original chart that I showed you. Okay, so again, we want to be using a full range of value. I can't stress that enough. So make sure, again, when you're using pencil, the darker values closer to your black side are going to be a pencil that's in the B range. And then switch to an HB or a 2H pencil when you get closer to the other side, or about halfway, I would say switch to an HB or 2H. That way you can yield lighter results. Okay. All right, so that's what you guys are going to be doing for this coming Wednesday. That's the 9th of September. And just email it to my email address at peide@carrollcc.edu. And then you'll notice there's an artist list on the bottom of this handout. And this is available under modules on Canvas, so make sure that you check it out there. But we have a dozen or so artists that are listed on here. What I want you guys to do is take a look at that list, and I'd select 3 to 5 different images by one or several of the artists that are mentioned on this list, print them out in black and white, and bring them to class along with a couple sheets of cardstock on Monday, September 14th. Okay, so look at the list. Make sure that you choose images that have high contrast. So that's going to be that full range of value from black to white, everything in between. You don't want to pick images that are just black and white. You want to have a grayscale in there as well, and you want to make sure that they're not washed out, or there are too many grays and not enough darks or lights, or it's not really going to work for the upcoming assignment that we're going to be doing. So you want to make sure you have those printed out and ready to go. If you need to come to campus to use the computers to print stuff off there, that should be fine. Just make sure that you do the wellness check online before you come. Okay, so yeah, that's pretty much all I have for you. Let me know if you have any questions. Hopefully that should be pretty straightforward, but I really would like you guys to follow this template here to make sure that your value scales are nice and neat, and they're not just, randomly placed on the page. It's a lot easier to get consistent measurements with the way that I showed you how to do this. But again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I would be happy to answer. All right, take care. Thanks.